Who knows what Jay-Z, J.K. Rowling, Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey all have in common? Okay, I will tell you then. They have all overcome failure in one shape or form to go on to gain success in their respective careers. Welcome to My Perfect Failure. Join us as we delve into the world of our perfect failures. We will interview, explore, and discuss how our perfect failures can lead us to success. Join us and tune in.
Welcome everybody to another episode of My Perfect Failure. Today, I'm super excited because I have another amazing guest for you. So my guest today is a highly sought after speaker, trainer, and coach known as the Jim Carrey with a PhD. He has spoken to over 3,500 audiences worldwide and authored 16 books, including his latest book, Leadership Begins with Motivation. He helps entrepreneurs, executives, and business owners boost their income, freedom, and impact by improving their communication skills. He's a co-founder of Words Top Reading Engagement Program. He's on a mission to bring joy back into education and the workplace. So a very warm welcome to My Perfect Failure, Dr. Danny Brassell. How are you?
Fantastic, Paul. Thanks for bringing some joy into the world. I really appreciate the diversity of the guests that you have. It's must listening. So thank you and your audience for giving me some time today.
Well, you're absolutely welcome. And I mentioned to you before we started recording that I've been listening to your content for the last 48 hours. And yeah, it's very enlightening, very engaging, very educational, very inspiring, very impactful. So I'm delighted that My Perfect Failure can be part of your content. So that's a big honor. I'm just looking at your books behind you. So I've got a random question. So if you were going to recommend one book from behind you, is there one that springs to mind that I should read?
Well, this shelf are books that I authored, so I can push
really?
myself.
Well, it can be your book. It can be one of yours then.
No, I wouldn't do that. Oh goodness. There's lots of different ones. Actually, I love the one I love everything that Walter Isaacson writes. He just did a biography on Elon Musk. He's done one on Einstein, but the one I love that he did is on Steve Jobs. It's great because it shows you the good and the bad, and too many biographies don't show a balance like that. And there's a true story in that book. I don't know if you know this story. I've told this story to thousands of people. Every time I tell the story, I still get goosebumps. Do you know the story about Steve Jobs' father, Paul?
No, I don't.
Yeah, so Steve was adopted as a child. And when their stock went public, he made like $100 million overnight. And so he hired a private investigator to find his birth mother. It took about a week. The investigator gives Steve the information. So Steve flies down. She's in Los Angeles, and they have lunch, and it's kind of tense. And she apologized. "I'm so sorry I gave you away, Steve." And he says, "Oh, no, my parents have been great." One thing I definitely appreciated about Steve Jobs, his adoptive parents, he always called his parents. So I thought that was cool. Yeah, it was nice. I mean, there's plenty of bad things about him, but that's a really positive thing. Well, then all of a sudden, there's like this Star Wars moment where she looks at him. She's like, "Well, Steve, there's something you need to know. You have a sister." And it turns out Steve Jobs, his sister is Mona Simpson, who's a best-selling novelist. She wrote the novel Anywhere But Here, which was made into a movie with Natalie Portman and Susan Sarandon. They became friends. They talked every single day for the rest of his life. Well, his sister Mona, she looks at Steve and she's like, "You and I have the same dad. I've never met our dad. Can you hire this investigator to find our father?" And he's like, Sure, no problem." And so it takes the guy about a week again. And so Steve's having lunch with his sister, and he gives her a 3x5 card. He's like, "Here's her information. If you want to meet this guy, you can, but he's a jerk as far as I'm concerned. You can't even tell him I exist." And so Mona's like, "Okay." And so she flies up. He's running a small restaurant up in Sacramento, and it's very tense for about 5 hours, but finally they warm up to one another. And the father's like, "Oh, Mona, I'm so sorry I gave you up for adoption. I'm so sorry you have to see me like this. I used to be successful, really successful. I used to have big restaurants. I had the biggest restaurant in Silicon Valley. Get this, Mona, one time Steve Jobs came into my restaurant and
But
she's
don't you?
staring right at him and she can't tell him that's your son. This is a true story. I still get chills every time I tell this story. It's the craziest story. And it turns out he found out Steve Jobs was his son. He tried to communicate with him and Steve would have nothing to do with him, which was
Okay.
interesting because Steve became a deadbeat father in his own right when with his first daughter,
Yeah,
Lisa. So it's the apple didn't fall far from the tree, but it's interesting. I just love getting into his mind. There's
yeah,
stories in this book. One of the stories I liked was for the Macintosh. He's screaming at the engineers. He's like, "You got 48 hours to create this technology that's never existed before." And he's screaming at them basically for 2 days, and they invent it. And all of these guys are ready to quit. And right when they're about to
yeah.
quit, Steve Jobs holds up a pen. He said, "All great artists sign their work." And he had all the engineers sign the microchip that went into the first Macintosh. And the engineers are like, "I hated this guy. And this guy pushed me to do things I didn't know I was capable of.
Mm.
I love this man. It's a fascinating book. It's really the human stories. Everybody has their pros and their cons, and it's just brilliantly written. So
Yeah.
that's the book I would
Okay.
recommend.
Okay. So
Unleash us.
that's one I need to read. It's
Yeah, it's a great one.
interesting. I like the fact that you said as well that this particular author, when he creates a book on these I guess thought leaders, these amazing people, that he's given a balanced overview. So it's not just the amazing stuff. You get the warts and all, because I think we learn more from that. If it's just
Absolutely.
either negative or positive, and it doesn't give us that lovely overview, we the reader don't can't learn as much. And I'm sure you'd probably be able to appraise this more better than I, but I guess I imagine that you would get more absorbed into the book because you're getting everything.
Yeah. Well, that's what draws me to your podcast, Paul, is, if there's one strategy I could share with your audience is when you're speaking to a group of people, don't share your successes, share your
Mm,
failures.
mm,
Because not everybody in your audience has succeeded, but they've all failed.
mm,
And the more you expose your own vulnerability, they're going to love you for that. And that's what I appreciate. I'm more interested in the struggle
mm.
before they became famous, before they became powerful. What
Yeah.
was it that, I was speaking at an event a couple of weeks ago. I felt kind of like a jerk because the two speakers in front of me kept on saying, "Enjoy the journey, enjoy the journey." And so it just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So when I got up on stage, I said, "Did you ever notice the people who say enjoy the journey have already succeeded?" I mean, when they
Yeah.
were having a tough time paying rent, were they like, "Man, I'm really enjoying this journey. This is great that I'm on food stamps." I mean, nobody enjoys the journey. It's
Yeah.
great advice, but it's fairly useless as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. It's how do we navigate that journey? Because the
Yeah.
journey is always going to be bumpy.
Hmm.
And it's like, because when I set the podcast up, even I was curious to understand how do people like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, because these guys, we know about failures. I was listening to a podcast on Richard Branson last week, I think, and apparently he's got 40 businesses now that actually exist, but on his journey, he's had 400 businesses. So 360 of those, for one reason or another, haven't worked or they've gone away. But invariably, we just hear about the gloss, which is his airline and the banks and all these different things. But the journey is difficult. How does he stick on the journey? What's the ingredients that allows him to carry on and to find success after the failures and after the setbacks?
That's right. One of my favorite quotes, and I'll butcher it, but I'll paraphrase. But Max Levchin, he said, "The first company I started was a complete failure. The second one wasn't a complete failure, but it wasn't much better." He's like, "Number three was all right." He's like, "Number four almost wasn't a failure." He's like, "Number five was PayPal." If it only takes you four failures before
Yeah,
you find
yeah,
co-find $1 billion company, you're doing all right.
yeah. What would be interesting is to understand what he learned from every
Hmm.
phase of that and what got him to PayPal. But yeah, I'm excited to have a conversation with you. I said before we hit the record button, we can't possibly absorb all that you do into 45-ish minutes. So what I was keen to maybe ask you, the first question is your mission. Maybe you can give us some insights into your mission. I know reading's very strong for you. Where does that come from? Where did it all begin?
Awesome. Thank you for that, Paul. So my mission is to bring joy back into education in the workplace. And I do that by focusing on people's communication skills, which everybody has four communication skills. First of all, you have writing, which you'd mentioned in the kind intro with me. I've written 16 books. I'm writing number 17 right now, and I'm loving 17.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, 17 is the best. Second of all, there's reading, and you mentioned I'm the co-founder of the world's top reading engagement program, which in just over 2 months shows parents how to get their kids to read more, read better, and most importantly, to love reading. Because I find schools do an adequate job of teaching kids how to read, but the question I always ask people is, well, what good is it teaching a person how to read if they never want to read?
Yeah.
I teach people why to read, because I've never had to tell a kid, go watch TV. I've never had to tell a kid, go play a video game. And I never want to have to tell a kid, go read. I want them to choose to do it on their own because they love it. Third, and you mentioned this also, actually you mentioned everything in the intro, I speak all over the world, at least 100 dates a year, basically reminding people to take their job seriously without taking themselves seriously, because they ain't all that, neither am I. And if you think you're all that, teach kindergartners for a week. Those little ones will set you straight. And then fourth, and I think this is probably what we'll focus on today, which is listening. Listening skills are really important. And so I listen to speakers every day. I watch probably at least 10 speakers a day. And I work primarily with entrepreneurs, business owners, and executives who probably aren't speakers per se, but want to enhance their speaking ability so that they can take their audience to take the next step, whether that's to purchase their product or to donate to their cause, or even just to invest in their idea. And I never thought I would love coaching people because I'm kind of a perfectionist. I have a two-step process. Step one is listen to me. Step two is do it. But the more I work with people from a vast array of fields, I'm like, wow, it still disappoints me when people don't follow the strategies that I share with them, because I really want them to succeed. But the people who are succeeding just blow me away. There's a guy, I worked with a guy about a year ago, last January, Gustavo. I mean, the guy should be president of the United States. He emigrated from Ecuador, didn't speak a word of English, Paul, worked every menial job known to man, saved up every dime, invested in real estate, over 20 years, made millions of dollars. And so the speech he and I were crafting, his offer was he has a coaching program on how to make money in real estate. It's a 4-month program for $40,000. And I'm like, wow, that's a big ask. Yeah. But we worked on it. I said, well, there's only 2 ways you get better at speaking. Is first of all, you watch lots of speakers and lots of situations. And then second of all, one of my mentors was a guy named Jim Rohn, and Jim used to say, you can't pay other people to do your push-ups. And so the way you get better at speaking is you got to speak. And so I told him, we got to do the reps. I want you speaking tomorrow and it's going to stink. And I want you speaking the next day and it's going to stink, but it's going to stink a little bit less. And after about 10 times, you'll start getting the hang of it. The 20th time, you'll start feeling like it's pretty good. You'll get better all the time. And so he mentioned, Paul, he was going on a podcast that night. And I said, all right, I want you, the presentation we've just put together, I want you to incorporate it into the podcast. I want you to make your offer. He calls me the next day, Paul. I need to charge people more money because he's all exuberant. He's like, oh my gosh, Danny, you're a genius. I'm like, did you go on the podcast? He said, yes. I said, did you make the offer? He said, yes. I said, did you sell any? He's like, 23. Now, math isn't my specialty. Reading is my specialty, Paul. But if I did my math correctly, he made that evening $920,000 on an offer we had crafted that afternoon. I mean, that was amazing. And since then, he and I are still in contact. In the last year, he made 8 figures on that presentation. And he's my shining example to people. I'm like, he's somebody, the reason he succeeded, though, is he did the work. It takes a lot of hard work to get that kind of success. And so Gustavo, he should be president of the United States. I love stories like that.
That's beyond phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
That's beyond phenomenal. So what I'd like to do, if this works for you, I want to go back to the reading a little bit, and then I want to
Right.
come right back to communication skills for entrepreneurs and executives, because I think that, like Gustavo, I'm not sure that we can get everybody to that level. Maybe we can,
Yeah.
maybe you can rather, but I definitely come across entrepreneurs who want to go to the next level and don't know how to. And it's not because they don't have the ability, it's because they haven't come across somebody like you who can give them the cues, the training, the coaching, which really can help them. But I'm just intrigued by reading. What got you into reading? Because I'm sure I listened somewhere that reading wasn't something that you gravitated to as a youngster.
Yeah, I'm kind of embarrassed to say this, is I absolutely hated reading growing up. My father was a librarian. I always hated the public library. It always smelt funny to me. The furniture was uncomfortable. There was always an elderly woman telling me to be quiet.
Mhm.
There was always some freaky homeless guy hanging out by the bookshelves who
Yeah.
thought he was a vampire, right? I hated the library. And I spent the bulk of my career for over 20 years teaching in the inner city in South Central Los Angeles in Compton and Watts, working with kids that didn't have a lot of the resources that I had available to me growing up. And I basically said to myself, Paul, shame on me. I mean, I was very blessed growing up and I didn't realize it. Both of my parents were in the home. Um, you know, we didn't have much money, but we also never starved. We always had food on the table. And my parents always read to us kids. They read in front of us kids, and they made sure we had plenty of access to reading materials. And so it really became a passion of mine because I told my students all the time, and I still to this day, is like I've read about. There's plenty of people that might be really good readers that don't necessarily become effective leaders, but I have no. You can't give me a single example in any industry where you can show me an effective leader that's not also an avid reader. I mean,
Mm.
you look in, like in the military, General Schwarzkopf, they said, could read in 4 languages. He could quote Shakespeare voraciously. You'll like this story. President Kennedy, when he was president, a journalist asked him, well, what are you reading, sir? And he said, oh, I'm reading this kind of cool. It's this neat little spy novel about this guy named James Bond. And MGM heard that. They bought the rights to the MGM to the entire James Bond franchise. That's the reason we have James Bond movies, was because of a flippant comment
I had
from
no
President
idea.
Kennedy. Athletes, you know, since you're in England, I had to give you a soccer example. I just read a wonderful biography on Sir Alex Ferguson,
Yeah.
who was the manager at Manchester United forever, just very successful. And it was just fascinating. He has a whole bunch of pages just devoted to the different types of things that he read about. He liked reading about the mafia, but he also liked reading about leaders. He read a lot about the American football coach Vince Lombardi. He's like, oh, he and I
Yeah.
are very similar in the way we do things. And he read about like presidents and things like that. So that's a sports figure. You know, entertainers. You know, Tom Cruise, Whoopi Goldberg, and Richard Branson all have something in common. They're all dyslexic. And I
Yeah.
work often with dyslexics. A lot of people don't know this. Over half of the Fortune 500 CEOs in the world are dyslexic. And so dyslexics are interesting because they tend to process information a lot better with their ears. And so one of the strategies I share with them is, well, you don't have to read on your own. The research is very clear on this. Listening to audible books is just as good as reading them on your own. And so that's one of the strategies I share with people is, feed your mind with, turn off the TV news
Yeah.
and read a funny children's book
Mm.
or listen to an audio book. You'll do much better in life. Yeah, so that's a
Yeah.
very long answer to your short question, but it's kind of my parents laughed that I became a literacy expert since I hated reading growing up.
It must be interesting for them to see someone that didn't gravitate towards it as a child, but now you're doing all this wonderful work and you're helping, particularly teaching, I guess, kids or people in Compton and South Central. That must have been incredibly insightful, but also, I imagine, equally or maybe more rewarding.
Yeah, yeah, they taught me a lot more than I ever taught them.
Mm.
I mean, you saw the circumstances a lot of kids had to overcome. And I mean, this is just always my prayer, is that they could change and it's interesting. We love to label kids at a very young age. And I
Yeah.
always tell kids, look at the most successful people. I read biographies all the time, Paul, and it's kind of sad to me that one of the common characteristics of most successful people is they dropped out of school. I'm like, what are we doing in the school system that's so wrong? I mean, we need to do a better job. I had a kid when I was a second grade teacher. So this was a 7-year-old named Kiara. And Kiara's first grade teacher told me, Kiara don't know nothing. I'm like, well, thank you for that. Well, Kiara, who don't know nothing, comes into my classroom one day. He's like, hey, Mr. Brassell, you see Barkley last night? He had 18 points and 16 boards. I'm like, thank you, Kiara. Because from that day forward, after lunch, every day, I sat Kiara on my lap and we read the Los Angeles Times sports page. And guess what, Paul? By the end of the year, Kiara was one of my best readers. And all that kid read about were sports. Now, do I think Shakespeare is important? Yes, I do. But before you get there, you got to get the kid hooked. And the research is very clear on this. It doesn't matter what you read. What matters is how much you read. It doesn't matter if you're reading James Joyce or James and the Giant Peach. People who read more read better. One of the strategies I share with parents is, and I always talk about boys because 4 out of 5 struggling and reluctant readers are boys. Boys are a lot trickier. And I always tell parents, the little boy who only reads Captain Underpants books and books about bodily functions, that boy is going to be a better reader than the little boy who refuses to read anything. Captain Underpants is the gateway drug to Shakespeare, but we got to get the kid hooked first. And there's simple here's a strategy for the parents listening right now. This is one of my favorite strategies I share with parents. I say, I have a feeling television's here to stay. So just make the rule in your house, have the closed captioning on the television all the time. And parents always say, well, wait a second, the show is in English and the subtitles are in English. What good does that do? I'm like, well, that's a fair point, but let me make a point. Have you ever watched a show with subtitles and not looked at those subtitles? It's very difficult to do. Your brain is actually oriented towards the text. And there's actual research that supports this. If you look at reading scores around the world, the more kids watch TV, the lower their reading scores are in every single country on the planet except for one. The country where kids watch the most TV also has the highest reading scores in the world. It's Finland. And people always ask, well, how can this be? I'm like, well, because Finland makes really bad TV shows. And so what they have to do is they have to import all these old American sitcoms like Happy Days and Gilligan's Island, and they have to translate them into Finnish on the screen. The kids are constantly reading. So it's a simple strategy anybody can do. Even, I've worked with some of the poorest parents that always said, oh, we have nothing to read at home. I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure you have a television set. Turn on the closed captioning, and there's one little strategy for you.
That's a wonderful strategy for parents globally, because kids clearly always want to watch TV or be on console. So that's a compromise actually that I think kids go for, because it gives them TV, but also they're going to get the captions. So they're going to read, they're going to engage the text. Can I just ask you something around, I'd just like to get your thoughts on, you gave a stat, I think around the Fortune 400, that half of the people on that are dyslexic, and which is a phenomenal stat. Do you have any ideas why we see an overwhelming number of people that have dyslexia but are performing really well, and reading for them, you imagine, would be more challenging than people that don't have dyslexia?
Yeah, that's a great question, Paul. I mean, if you look at it, think about the most successful people usually have to overcome a lot more adversity. And so I think, and this is a theory, I don't have research to prove this, but I believe that people like Sir Richard Branson, because he had struggles with reading, he had to, it's sort of like a blind person who enhances their ability to hear things and to smell things. They use other senses to compensate for the weakness. So I would say it would be the same thing with dyslexia. You see a lot of these people. I was just listening to a biography on Rose, I can't remember her last name, but she was a Russian immigrant to Omaha, Nebraska, and she founded the Nebraska Furniture Mart store, which Warren Buffett bought from her for $60 million. And she worked until she was over 100 years old. And I don't believe she even knew how to read, but she was a master with numbers. She could calculate them right in her head right there. And I would suspect that the reason for that is because since she couldn't read, she had to overcompensate and figure out another way. There was a great book by a gentleman named John Corcoran, who was a teacher for 30 years, and he didn't know how to read.
I think I
He didn't
heard
learn.
about that. Or maybe I didn't. I heard something similar to
It's
that.
a fascinating book where you're, and I mean, and that's, but this is what I tell people is every reading disability is curable. You just
Yeah.
need a person to believe. I mean, I tell this, my poor students had to hear this all the time. I said, you know what? Sometimes you need somebody else to believe in you before you believe in yourself. I believe in all of you. They only give me the best and the brightest. So let's go out, do some good and make this world a better place. You tell that to kids enough, they start believing it.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in the power of belief and the power of suggestion to people that you can do something. I mean, it was who's it? Earl Nightingale said, "We become what we think about." So why don't you think about positive things instead of negative? That's why I don't watch TV news, because it's always
Negative. Yeah.
it's very negative. I want things that lift me up. That's why I listen to your podcast, is I love to hear about people sharing their own trials and tribulations and how they overcame them. Those are the stories I'm interested in.
Yeah, likewise, likewise. I just to segue in, I'm sure I read somewhere that probably in your teaching days that you gave for a period of time all your pupils A's to give them that encouragement that they were on the right track to get them to the next level.
Yeah, that when I taught all age levels from the high schoolers all the way to the little ones. And when I was first teaching, the first student I ever gave a failing grade to, he showed up black and blue to school the next day. And I swore to God, I would never be responsible for another child's beating again. And so, I looked at the research. The research is very clear on this. Show me the research that shows a relationship between a grade and what you learned. It doesn't exist. I got A's in plenty of classes I did nothing in, and I got C's in classes I worked my tail off and learned more in that class and all my other classes combined. All you have to do is look at the United States Congress as a perfect example of this concept. You don't have to be the sharpest tool in the shed to be a member of Congress, but there's something that Congress does that the research does support. They show up.
Yeah.
Look at the research. Kids that come to school do much better than kids that don't come to school. So my priority as a teacher was never on grading. It was on attendance. I need them there, because even if they act like they're not paying attention, this is the most fascinating thing to me, Paul. I'll have students that I had 20 years ago come up to me. I don't even know who they are. I don't remember them at all. The students I spent all the time with, I never hear from them, but it's some student that was kind of a wallflower that said, "You really made such an impact on me." And I had no idea at the time but the kids are listening. This is why I tell parents all the time. My pastor used to say something I loved. He said, "Parents, you have the greatest home field advantage in the history of the planet. You could be the worst parent ever, and your kid doesn't know it. To them, you're mom or dad." And I say the same thing about teachers, is that might be a bad teacher, but the kid doesn't know it. To them, you're the teacher. And so I think it's a very important responsibility. And so I love it when I see these people that are really recognizing the importance of teachers. I give the example, my brother's in the Air Force, and we were having lunch at a diner, and he was in uniform, and the waitress, she said, "Thank you for your service, sir. We're giving you your meal for free." And I looked at her, I'm like, "Why don't you thank me for my service? I'm a public school teacher. I've had many more weapons drawn on me than he's ever had drawn." It's ridiculous.
Okay. Okay. And then lastly, then I want to get on to the how we can help entrepreneurs and executives. So I guess my challenge with reading, sometimes with me, I do read more. I'm really pleased that you said about audiobooks, because I love audiobooks. If I'm on a train, on a tube, somewhere, there's nothing better for me than to have a great audiobook where I can just read and engage and enlighten my thinking and my mind. But I think sometimes with me, it's like having the right daily habit to engage reading. Sometimes when I think probably is the wrong time for me to read is late at night, because I always feel tired when I try to engage. I guess what I found recently, if I cobble together some time at lunchtime and then read, I tend to be more engaged with the with the whatever I'm reading at the time. But I always like to think to myself, I'm looking forward to reading that night, and then I might do 3 pages and then I'm falling asleep. So there might be other people that are listening to this. They've got their own little challenges with it, where maybe they're not reading as much as they would like because maybe we're not isolating the best time for us to read.
Yeah, I mean, they're like, so I use the phone now is a big
Mm,
thing I point out to kids. I'm like, because I think most kids have a cell phone. Now, most
yeah.
people waste their time on social media, and there's a lot of negativity on that.
Mm,
I think when used properly, the phone can be a wonderful tool. And so on my daily calendar, I have updates throughout the day, you know, because so like I'm a bad Christian. I'm always trying to learn scripture. And so every day now at 5:16, I'm reviewing First Thessalonians 5, 16 through 18, which is rejoice always, pray without ceasing, in all circumstances give thanks, for this is the will of God for you in Christ Jesus. Okay, so I'm practicing that. You know,
you remember that?
I saw the movie. I saw the movie Dune, and in Dune, which is based on a great book by Frank Herbert, there's this thing called the Litany Against Fear. So every morning at 9:11, I'm trying to learn this. So it's, and I don't know if I have it yet, but it's, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the evil eye to see its past. I think when the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. So I'm almost got that.
Mm,
I
phenomenal.
married my wife on December 20th. So every day at 12:20, I have an alert to tell my wife I love her. But this is how I'm incorporating literacy throughout the
Mm,
day and making it part of my day. The reading habit program that I helped design, there's two numbers I want people to focus on, 67 and 20. So 67, a lot of people will tell you it takes 21 days to change a habit. And to
mm,
those people, I say, show me the research on that. It's completely fabricated. I know exactly where the number comes from. It comes from a wonderful book written in 1960 by Dr. Maxwell Maltz called Psycho-Cybernetics. And in the preface of that book, Dr. Maltz, who was a plastic surgeon, said he noticed it took most of his patients about 21 days to get used to their new faces. Well, a lot of self-help personal development gurus, a lot of people I respect, by the way,
mm.
started telling people it took 21 days to change a habit, and there is no research whatsoever to demonstrate that is true. Well, in 2009, researchers at the University of London decided to do a habit formation study, and they found it took anywhere from 18 to 254 days to change a habit, and the average was 66 days. Well, I don't like the number 66, so I threw in a bonus day, 67 days. And so here's why this is important. Let's say you go on a diet, Paul, and you follow it religiously for 21 days, but on day 22, you fall off the wagon. Well, you blame yourself. And that's completely false because research shows on average, it takes at least 3 times longer than that to change the habit. And by the way, the
Yeah.
habits can be, you know, like if you want to drink a glass of water before breakfast every day, maybe that takes 18 days to change that habit. But if you want to quit smoking, that's going to take 254 days to change a habit. And so we're focused on 67 days, 67, just over 2 months. Now, the second number is 20. So researchers were interested in what makes successful students successful. So they were looking for characteristics. They stumbled upon one which fascinated them. It was the number of minutes spent reading outside of school. They looked at the low students, the average students, and the high students. The lowest students, your bottom 20th percentile, F students, failing students, they averaged less than a minute a day reading outside of school. That didn't surprise anybody. It's probably why they're at the bottom of the class.
Mm,
But the next number did startle the researchers. The kids at the 70th percentile, the C students, your average students, right in the middle of the class, they average 9.6 minutes a day reading outside of school. And this is when the room gets really quiet when I'm doing a live training with parents. And the first parent raises their hand and says, wait a sec, are you saying if I can get my kid to read 10 minutes a day, I can take him from an F to a C? That's exactly what I'm saying. But the next number really floored the researchers. The kids in the 90th percentile, A minus students, some of your best students, do they spend 3 hours a day reading for fun? No. Do they spend an hour a day reading for fun? No. The average was just over 20 minutes. My goal is to find 20 minutes in every person's day to help them with that. Now, I've already shared 2 things with you that are important. First of all, being read aloud to is just as good as reading on your own. So
Yeah.
I'll tell parents, if it takes you 10 minutes each way to drive your kids to school, put in an Audible book, you've covered your 20 minutes just going back and forth to school. And second of all, and I just alluded to it, the minutes don't have to be consecutive. So you can do a minute here, 3 minutes there. I mean, I'm like you. I like to start my day with something positive to read, and I end my day with something positive to read. Maybe during lunch, I'll listen to an audio book or something. But lots of ways you can get those minutes in. Or when you're watching TV, those count when you have the kids reading off of the screen. I mean, YouTube's done statistics that 80% of the people watching videos on YouTube do it with the sound off. So make sure the closed captioning is on the YouTube videos.
Yeah, so that's wonderful insight for parents. When I see my cousins, because they've got children, I'll be making sure that the captions are on, because it's so difficult for parents these days to get their children away from, or to get them to do things like reading. I would say in my nephews and nieces' defense, they actually like reading.
It's great.
They're actually great. In the morning, I've actually seen this with my own eyes, where the parents are still trying to get them ready for school. But one of the reasons they're trying to get them ready for school is because they're reading the book. And I wish I'm envious, because I'm thinking, why wasn't I like that as a child? So in relation to what we've just covered and some of the wonderful examples that you provided, is that part of your reading engagement program?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, every day it's basically videos from me sharing some new strategy for parents to try, and not all, different strokes for different folks. What works with some kids doesn't work with every kid. That's why I give lots of different strategies. When you find one you like, you take it.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll get a link from you and I'll put that in the show notes for that program. So equally, I'm keen to unlock how entrepreneurs and executives can improve their communication skills, because I gave you an example earlier today. I spoke to an executive that has got he's achieved a good role in his business. He's an FD of a company, but he knows that to go to the next level, he's aware of it, which I think is good, but he wants to develop those communication skills. He knows he can do it, but actually he knows he can do it, but he doesn't know how to do it. So I thought, actually, I'm talking to yourself today. So let's maybe cover this subject. And I know, because I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs also, that seemingly these people are very, very capable, got wonderful talents. But in terms of having some of the communication skills, which they do need to really take their business or their career to the next level, that can actually make them anxious, because they know that those skills aren't there yet. So I was keen to maybe get some advice from you about what can we do to help these guys and me achieve and improve our communication skills.
Awesome. You're talking my language. This is what I love. So I work with a guy, Jimmy Hayes Nelson. We do seminars once a month in Dallas, Texas, or some companies will just fly us out for 2 days to work with their executives on crafting. We call it a stump speech. I've heard people call it a signature talk. You can call it peanut butter and jelly. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about the name of it. Basically, what this is your fingerprint. This is how you introduce yourself to people that don't know you, and it can be used in a one-on-one conversation, or it can be used in speaking to a conference of 1,000 people. You can do it virtually, or you can do it in person. And basically, there's 4 components, and there's different. Every teacher has their own way of teaching it. My 7th grade speech teacher, Lynn Eskridge, she said, you always have an introduction, then you have instruction, then you have an invitation to your audience on how they can work with you further, and then you end with inspiration. Some people say, well, you have to connect, and then you teach the content, and then you have your call to action, and then you connect again. Pat Quinn, a gentleman I've worked with who I think is the best in the business, he says you have your opening, and then you have your content, and then you have your tactical close, and then you have your emotional close. Pete Vargas has a nice one where he says, first you speak to the heart, then you speak to the head, then you speak to the hand, and then you speak to the heart. Whatever. There's just different components to the presentation. And when I'm doing my 2-day seminars with people, we're working on crafting that presentation and then also giving you stagecraft. So I work with people that are nervous all the time.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of Indian engineers in Silicon Valley, and my specialty is adding humor. And I tell them, you don't have to be funny. You just need to get people to smile so that they're staying with you throughout your presentation. So I won't tell you the name of the gentleman, but he has a difficult name to pronounce. And so we changed his opening. So now he says, my name is Majareen Maharaji. Gee, I sure hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And it just gets the audience to like it. And that's what we're trying to do so it's really one of the things. So I watch lots of speakers. I watch politicians. I watch televangelists. I watch comedians. If you watch comedians, they're really good about this. Comedians usually this is what I always really try to stress with people. Whatever you perceive as your weakness, you should turn it into your strength. So if you're nervous, like maybe show people that your hands are shaking like crazy. They're going to love you because whether you realize it or not, your audience is actually rooting for you. You watch like a comedian like Jim Gaffigan, who's a big fat white guy. And so he makes jokes about being a big fat white guy. Well, now people love him. I always show people the end of the movie 8 Mile with Eminem. And there's a scene where it's between Eminem and this other rapper, and Eminem's friends are like, oh man, he's going to say that he slept with your girl and your mom lives in a trailer park and you're white trash. And so what he does is when he does his rap, he says, I'm white trash. I live in a trailer. My mom, and like he takes away everything the guy can attack him on. Yeah. And the guy doesn't know what to do. And that's brilliant.
Yeah.
You know, if I was advising, we're in a presidential election right now between President Biden and former President Trump. If I was advising President Trump on how to be more personable, I would say, well, talk about your humility, because he's the least humble person on the planet. So if you make fun of that, you've taken it away as an argument. If I was advising President Biden, I'd say, make fun of your age. Turn it into a strength. Say, oh, I keep on forgetting things because I'm 138 years old or whatever. If you do that, the other person can't attack you. They're just going to. President Reagan did it in the 1984 election against Vice President Mondale. Is in the first debate, President Reagan couldn't remember a lot of information. And so in the second debate, the first question is, Mr. President, you forgot a lot of information. Is age going to be an issue in this campaign? And Reagan said, I am not going to make age an issue in this campaign. I am not going to point out to the American public my opponent's youth and inexperience. He got Mondale laughing. I'm like, the election is over. It's over. It's amazing. So that's really one of the things I try to get people to, because if you want to tell a sad story, that's fine. Don't go to me. I'm not that person. I'm not the person to teach it. I'm so sick of the sad stories. And I'm not saying it's not effective. It is effective. I find it's very manipulative, but it is effective in sales. There's 3 reasons why I like to add humor to talks. First of all, the world just survived a global pandemic. Everybody's had some really bad stuff happen to them. I think we need more hope in the world. We don't need to hear another sad story. Second of all, I point this out to people. I mean, I have a friend and his daughter was murdered in a school shooting. I don't know about you, Paul. You have to be stronger than me to tell that story 1,000 times, the worst moment of your life. I don't know how he does that. And third, and this is where people don't like me for saying this, I have one objective when I'm on stage. I want you to leave feeling better than when you came in. I want you smiling. I want you happy. I can tell the same joke again and again. And there's something admirable about the intention of getting people to smile and laugh. I think when you tell the same sad story again and again, by the 20th time, those are crocodile tears. And now you're just being manipulative. And I have a real problem with that. Now, I'm not saying it's not effective. I see it all the time. I'm not going to say it. I was watching this very famous singer, and I watched her 2 nights in a row, and she cried at the exact same moment in her presentation. I just said, you are fake. There is nothing I trust about you now. I didn't like that. Whereas a person that's just trying to get you to laugh, I mean, that's, you know, I can watch the same Monty Python skits again and again, and I'm just laughing hysterically. I'm like, these guys are phenomenal. And there's nothing manipulative about that. You know, and again, it works. And I know plenty of people that will, you know, train people to do that. I actually don't train anybody. You train animals. I teach people. You teach people. And I like working with people. And then, Paul, this is the thing I'll say to you and to anybody that's feeling bad about speaking out there. I was giving a speech to a school in India, about 5,000 kids. And this one little boy comes up to me. I'm pumping them all up, saying, you can do anything you want in life. And this 6-year-old boy comes up to me with tears in his eyes. And I look and I notice he's missing his left arm. He has a stub there. And he looks up to me and he says, how can I succeed? And so I crouch down, I get to his eye level, and I say, when I was a little boy, everybody used to make fun of me. I went to 18 different schools before I was 12 years old. They all called me stupid because I stuttered. And eventually I had a teacher, and she sat one-on-one with me, and she would sing things to me, and I could sing them back without my stutter. It was kind of like the movie The King's Speech. And eventually I lost my stutter and I became a swan. But I looked at that little boy and I said, isn't it interesting that the little boy that people used to make fun of for not being able to speak very well gets paid a lot of money to travel the world to do what? And he has the biggest grin on his face. He's like, speak. I said, don't let anybody tell you what you cannot do. Yeah. Everybody can do anything. Everything is teachable. And so the people that are nervous, I've worked with some of the most nervous speakers on the planet. Super Bowl champions. I've worked with Olympic athletes that have no problem performing in front of millions of people, but all of a sudden you get them on a stage and they freak out. And there's little strategies to get you so you're more comfortable. And really, it's for everything in life, Paul. It's kind of like your podcast. I guarantee you, the first time you did this podcast, you were nervous. The second time,
so nervous. So nervous.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and now it's become more routine for you. You're in your flow. You've got a flow because you had the reps. You have to do the reps.
And it's a continuous process.
Doesn't require the reps.
Yeah, so I was going to say it's a continuous process for me because I know that the ceiling is up there somewhere, and I want to get there. And I'll probably never get there, but I know what it was like at the beginning, where it was so incredibly conscious and every word I was self-conscious with, and to your point, the reps help. That's why I like doing this as much as I possibly can, because I want to have these discussions with people like you, which is massively important. That's why the podcast exists. But I know every single time I do this, it's more reps, it's more experience. There's something I'm going to learn, not just from you, but also from my own experience and my development as part of the process.
I admire you for that, Paul. I mean, complacency is a killer. The best part about continuous improvement is it's continuous. And I love that you keep on reaching higher. That's something very admirable.
Yeah. So what I wanted to get to is kind of leads into it, really. So you mentioned this amazing guy that you coached, and he was able to delivered his presentation at 40 grand a piece, and was able to make a sell of 23 in one discussion, one conversation, one podcast. So for people listening, who it's going to be impossible for the majority of us to deliver that. They might get 20 odd sales, but at that level, it's going to be a challenge. But if somebody can do it, it means that other people can as well, which I think is a positive thing to look at. So from his perspective, was he doing the reps? Was he practicing to get to that point? Did he isolate, or did you help him isolate where the challenge was, work on that, and he practiced?
Yeah, I certainly didn't believe that Gustavo was going to do that well the first try. I use him. I mean, I have a better story. I had a guy I was working with, Alberto, who's a veterinarian. He's a horse veterinarian, and he needed to do a TED Talk. And we redid his entire TED Talk to make it so. I'm like, well, the great thing about being a horse veterinarian is there's all kinds of expressions about horses. There's which are lessons in life, like all courses for all horses. When you fall off the horse, you get back on, and things like that. And he's an entrepreneur, and he was worried about his accent. I'm like, embrace the accent, make fun of yourself having this thick accent, and he did it. You can watch his TED Talk. He looks great. One of my favorite things, because I was listening to him and he was talking about how hard he worked when he was starting off as an entrepreneur. And I said, okay, well, in your talk, how about we do that? How about we say, when I first started off as an entrepreneur, my assistant was wonderful. His name was Alberto. And my website designer, he was the best in the business. His name was Alberto. And my marketing director, he was incredible. His name was Alberto because Alberto was doing everything. So he was doing, and the audience is laughing perfectly because I want him to have fun. I said, I don't want you getting up on stage not having fun. Like, this is something very serious to me. I'm like, no, no, no. You should be having fun because your audience, they're like, the audience is kind of like dogs. You know how dogs can smell fear? Audience can smell it too. But if you embrace it, it's no longer, now it's just like, hey, I don't know about you. I'm about to pee my pants. I'm as nervous as can be. Now the audience likes you. They're like, well, this is good. He's not trying to be a know-it-all. People like them. I know a lot of people teach that you have to be extraordinary on stage, and I don't think that you have to be extraordinary at all. I think the fact that you're on the stage already demonstrates that you're extraordinary. If you are going to do that, one of my little ninja tricks with people is I say, well, make sure the person introducing you, like, I didn't give you the introduction that you gave, Paul, but I'm like, wow, what an incredible introduction. That was, I'm going to make, Paul makes me sound like Jesus Christ. And so then when I get up on stage,
that's a condensed bio.
Yeah. So I'm like, so then my job is, once you make me sound like Jesus Christ, my job is, Jesus Christ forgot to wear his dress socks today. Now everybody's like, oh, this is somebody just like you and me. And that's important. Here's a strategy for everybody watching. So I'm watching speakers all the time, watching what they do. I watch men, I watch women. I watch them in front of men, in front of women. I watch them internationally, and I watch them in front of big audiences, small audiences. My ninja strategy is I watch a lot of award shows, because when the person wins the Academy Award, they only have 45 seconds to give a presentation. And most people waste their time. They get up there like, I want to thank God. I want to thank the Academy. It's stupid. Nobody remembers anything. But a couple of years ago, there was a British guy, Joe Walker. He won the Academy Award for Best Film Editing. And so it's film editing. All the audience, they're important actors and actresses. They don't care about a film editor. They're not paying attention. And he gets up there and he speaks very slowly. He says, a lot of people don't know this, but when framed properly, the term Academy Award nominee can be used as an insult. Well, now they're showing the audience, and all of a sudden people are kind of leaning in, like, what's he talking about? And he gets up and he says, for example, yesterday I got in an argument with my 17-year-old daughter, and she said, well, Academy Award nominee Joe Walker. All of a sudden you see everybody laughing. He gets off stage. Denzel Washington wants to meet him. Sandra Bullock wants to meet him. Brad Pitt wants to meet him. Time magazine called it one of the highlights of the Academy Awards. That's the power of connecting with your audience in 30 seconds. And that's why I love watching people like that. And again, I think humor is the strongest way. Obviously you can't use humor if, like, you're a survivor of like some horrible disease. Obviously, but even then, I worked with a guy, he's a 3-time cancer survivor. And so it was a really deep speech, but we still had to lighten moments, because I'm like, you can't take your speech is one note right now. It's very sad. And you can't have it. Even with a humorous speech, it can't be humorous the whole time. You also have to have moments where you're struggling also. It can't be a one-note speech. But I don't think I've ever worked with somebody where we had to work on that. We usually have to work on how to lighten it up a little bit and make them have fun. I want them having fun. I don't want you sweating on stage. And again, your stage doesn't have to be in front of 100 people. Your stage right now, Paul, is this podcast. And so this is your opportunity every time to get a little bit better. Every time you're getting a little bit better.
Yeah. And I like your point about the humor as well, because I think particularly for entrepreneurs and executives, particularly when they're nervous, particularly when they're not comfortable, we can be overtly serious, because I think you would know this better than me, but I think when we maybe don't have the confidence, we maybe don't have the courage maybe to lean into humor, and the presentation or the way that we communicate becomes even more dry than it probably would have done, because we just don't think at that point that we're capable of maybe showing some humor, tapping into what our authentic self might be. And yes, I'm glad that you pointed out that we can bring humor in, and we should think about it and think about creatively how we can do that. So obviously you're a coach and you coach people all over the world. I'm just wondering for people listening now, are there exercises that they can do maybe to think about what piece of humor can they bring in to maybe speeches that they may have for later on this week, or maybe the week after, or maybe later on this year? Are there things that they can do maybe to think about that?
I'll give you a strategy and then I'll give you an example. So the
Okay.
strategy is tonight, when you're at home, get in a comfortable chair with a libation of choice and a pen and paper. And for an hour, I want you to write down every story that's ever happened in your life. And I don't
Mm,
mean the entire story. I just mean triggers, like
yeah.
the time I locked myself out of the car in front of
Um,
that grocery store, the time dad spilt mustard on his tie at that fancy restaurant. In about an hour, you should come up with about 300 to 400 stories like that. Well, then the second part of the exercise is then I want you to think about, well, what's this really teaching us? Oh, well, this is a story about responsibility. Oh, this is a story about perseverance. Oh, this is a story about loyalty. And
mm,
I have on my computer literally thousands, tens of thousands of stories and folders. So if I need a story about love, there's a
yeah.
love. So here, I'll give you an example. So here's a presentation I just created for a couple of weeks ago. I said, when I was an elementary school teacher, every other teacher at my school went through hundreds, if not thousands, of Band-Aids every school year. I mean, kids want Band-Aids. They work better than smokes on the prison yard. Well, every single year, I went through exactly one Band-Aid. My colleagues asked, how can that be? Well, on the first day of school, there's always a chubby kid. We'll call him Paco. He's scraping at his scab all morning, finally has success after lunch, and the annoying little girl next to him raises her hand, rubs her nose, and says, Mr. Brassell, Paco's bleeding. I say, oh my gosh, Paco, look at that. You know what you need? You need a Band-Aid. All of a sudden, 33 little heads are looking at me. I say, you know what? I have a desk drawer filled with Band-Aids, and I don't just have ordinary Band-Aids. I have Mighty Morphin Power Ranger Band-Aids, and I'm going to give you the Green Ranger because he's the coolest. Now Paco's smiling. All the kids are smiling. I bring Paco to my desk. I says, oh, before I put on the Band-Aid, we have to clean out the wound. So I show the kids the bottle of clear liquid that says rubbing alcohol. I say, hey, Paco, hold on to my hand. This might sting a little bit. I pour the rubbing alcohol in his scab. He's screaming bloody murder. I put on his Band-Aid. I say, all right, kids, anybody else need a Band-Aid? My students can have a skull fracture and they will never ask
Yeah.
me
Yeah.
for a Band-Aid. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not going to give you a Band-Aid tonight. I'm going to give you practical strategies on how to make your speeches get audiences to take the
Mm,
next step. See how I did that?
mm, yeah.
Is
Powerful.
there's actually a role for the story, but I'm getting people laughing. And I always love childhood stories. I mean, I'm working with a guy right now. He's climbed the 7 highest peaks on the planet. Right now he's in Antarctica doing some kind of Iditarod. I mean, one time I spoke to him, he was in Madagascar swimming with sharks. And I'm like, Badr, nobody can understand how many people have done things like that, but
Yeah.
everybody peed their pants when they were 6 years old and had to confront their classmates. I mean, those are the stories that everybody likes. There's, you know, things that everybody
Yeah.
can relate to. And so that's what we're always trying to do is what can I do at the beginning? And I mean, that's the interesting research on presentations is the bun is more important than the burger. People remember the beginning of your presentation and they remember the
Okay.
end of your presentation, but they don't remember anything
Okay.
that you teach them. One of the strategies I try to show people, though, is I do want you to be helpful because people do remember
Mm,
if you're helpful. They might not remember your content, but they want to make sure, oh, this person, I learned a lot from that person in our time together.
yeah. Okay. Lovely. And once they come up with an idea, so we're going to go away, do the homework, write down some memories, get them down, and then practice, practice,
Mhm.
practice, practice. So the next time they've got the opportunity, and also for people that are listening and watching this, that really, yeah, are motivated to kind of push the envelope and actually improve their communication skills, should they be going out and doing things like maybe trying to go on a podcast, trying to maybe if there's an opportunity to do a presentation for a client or or whatever scenario it may be, start looking for opportunities and don't wait for them to come.
Well, I'm going to do shameless self-promotion and promote myself first, is they should come to me so we can
Yeah,
actually craft the
yeah,
presentation. Then they could
yeah.
do the reps. But if they don't do that, I have all kinds of, I break it down into those 4 different elements, the content being by far the least
Yeah.
important. What's important in the content is to be helpful. I also don't want people to be salesy. I'm very blessed. I've been trained in Robert Cialdini has a wonderful book called Influence.
Yeah.
And his persuasion techniques are wonderful, but what I like about him is they're very ethical. Is you can persuade your audience without being
Mm,
salesy, and your
that's
intent is
massive.
never for you to win; it's for both of you to win, which is something I don't think is trained. I don't
Okay.
think people are teaching enough.
Okay. That's massive. I do totally embrace and agree with you that you want to be good, effective. Because it's funny, actually. I think when you bring value and we're authentic, you don't need to sell because people just want to. They're going to reach out to you. And I
That's
think if
right.
we're salesy, I just think that we lose people, just gravitate away. Just in terms of getting towards the end now, I've monopolized your time. So for people, so what's the best way for people to find out more about your courses, to get in contact with you? What's the best way for us to help people do that?
Well, as a thank you to you and your audience, Paul, for enduring me for this hour
It's been
together,
amazing. It's been amazing.
if you go to freegiftfromdanny.com, again, freegiftfromdanny.com, I'm going to give everybody 2 freebies. First of all, I'm going to give everybody an e-copy of my book, Read, Lead, and Succeed. This is a book I wrote for an elementary school principal who was trying to keep his faculty and staff positively engaged. So I said, okay, I'll write you a book. So every week I give you a concept, an inspirational quote, an inspirational story, a book recommendation on a book you should read, but you're probably too lazy. So
Mm,
I also give you a children's picture book recommendation that you can read in 5 minutes, demonstrates the exact same point. Nothing turns me on more than CEOs starting off meetings with Dr. Seuss books. And then second of all, I'm going to give everybody access to, last summer, I did a 5-day reading challenge online for about 700 parents around the world, where every day for an hour, I'm basically sharing them the same strategies I share in the Reading Habit program, where I give you all kinds of strategies on how to get your kids excited about reading, because the more excited you get kids to read, the more likely they are to read. And the more you read, the better you get. You can get all that at freegiftfromdanny.com. And Paul, I really appreciate you having me on today. And I love your energy. I love that you're not a complacent person. You're always trying to get better. These are the people I always
mm,
want to be around. These are the people listening to this podcast, are people that want to get better. Anybody can sit there and watch the game and complain about their politicians. The people that change the world are the people that do something.
yeah,
So thank
absolutely.
you.
Well, yeah. Well, it's a massive honor to get you on the podcast. And even if I may say from a selfish perspective, because I always want to learn, grow. So having you on the podcast, I'm learning from everything that you've said. So I'm sure everybody listening, watching will be scribbling down, writing, doing their homework, writing their stories that they can maybe craft into presentations to be more funny. And thank you for your generous gift, which we'll put on the show notes and people can access that very easily. And I just have one last question, which is the recurring question. So if you could invite 3 inspirational people for dinner, or they can be alive or past, who would you invite?
Well, this is going to kind of sound silly. Uh, the person alive that I really want to meet, and it sounds kind of backward for being such a reading guy, but gosh, I would love to meet Steven Spielberg and talk to Steven Spielberg. His movies have just changed my
Mm,
life. So
yeah.
Steven Spielberg would be the one alive. The 2 others, I'm really bummed I never got to meet Nelson Mandela. I would
Mm,
love his book, Long Walk to Freedom, changed my life. That book everybody should read. This guy thought completely differently. The world would be a better place if we had more thinkers with kindness and grace that Nelson Mandela. And then my wife is from Singapore, and the person I admire the most in Singapore was Lee Kuan Yew, was the prime minister. He passed a couple of years ago, and Lee Kuan Yew is basically their George Washington.
okay.
He created I mean, Singapore is only just over 50 years old, and now it's got the most millionaires per capita on the planet. It's
I
one of
had
the
no
most,
idea.
it's unbelievable. So I would love I would love to meet Lee Kuan Yew too. So yeah, so that's an interesting dinner conversation. Steven Spielberg, Nelson Mandela, and Lee Kuan Yew. But gosh, that's kind of lame. I didn't even have a woman. I guess if I was going to get a woman, I'd bring my mom back.
Okay. Well, you can have 4. You can have 4.
Okay. So mom, because mom would definitely control the conversation. I never had a chance to speak.
Exactly. She would know when it's time to shift gears to get into something else. It's been amazing to have you on the podcast. Really, really love what you do. Really important. And again, from a selfish perspective, definitely want to grow, definitely want to read more, definitely want to know the tips that I can bring into my reading endeavor. So thank you so much. And hopefully we can do this again.
Thank you, Paul. Anytime. I appreciate it. God bless you.
Okay, thank you. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please do subscribe. It really does help us grow the channel. And if you know anybody that you know is looking to develop, wants to become more impactful with their reading and their communication skills, please do share this episode and direct them towards Dr. Danny Brassell. And your feedback is most welcome. So we're keen to hear about the things you like and equally the things you don't like. So you can find me at paul@myperfectfailure.com, or you can find me via the feedback page on the website. So take care for now. Bye.
Thanks for listening to My Perfect Failure podcast. Be sure to visit www.myperfectfailure.com to join the conversation. Subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or Google Play. Look out for our next episode.